So do we have the capacity to be a global citizen, a middle power global citizen? When we look at the middle powers as global citizens that I've been mentioning, Norway, for example, and some of the other Scandinavian states, what we see is their, in particular, what I call their governance integrity. They are extremely well governed. They don't go out into the international arena simply to advocate about human rights, for example. They do that, and very effectively. But if you look at the human rights records within those countries, they are second to none in the world. They have human rights charters and so on, which are extremely effective. So what I'm trying to suggest here is that if a middle power wants to have the ambition of having global significance as a global citizen, it has to have governance integrity. So is Australia internationally and regionally regarded for its governance integrity? Now, I'm ashamed to say that I don't think it does. Look at the way we treat Indigenous Australians. And this is where I'm coming to your point, Peter, that I think social policy and foreign policy come together at this point. Australia cannot be a global citizen as a middle power until it addresses the tremendous lack of integrity in our social policies. Indigenous Australians, the growth of socio-economic inequality, particularly over the last 30 years, the treatment of asylum seekers, discrimination against foreigners and outsiders, Muslims, for example, and the resurrection of what I think is of as the White Australia policy. So in conclusion, I ask simply, what is to be done? It's Lenin's question. Hence Malcolm Fraser calling me the communist. Well, first of all, if we're going to aim for a different kind of independent middle power status in our foreign policy, we have to abandon the politics of complacency, as I call it. We have to restore governance integrity and what I want to refer to as compassionate public policy, so that the economy serves society, not vice versa. Neoliberalism has turned that completely around. It's as if the economy comes first. As Bill Clinton said, stupid. Well, stupid Bill, you're wrong. Society comes first. And we must create an economy that serves our society, making it equitable, just, compassionate public policy, caring for people, not punishing them in terms of welfare programs and so on. So that's the first point, I think. Secondly, we really desperately need to educate young Australians for an Asian future. Asian languages, Asian histories, Asian economics, politics and cultures should be an integral part of our education system. In fact, Asian languages and Asian studies are in massive decline in our schools and universities. This worries me. A few years ago, I was in Japan working in a Japanese university, which was also advising the Ministry of International Trade and Industry. And a group of Australian politicians and negotiators came to Tokyo to negotiate the coal price for the next 12 months. Even today, we are still a major coal exporter. We shouldn't be, but we are. Japan is one of our major overseas markets. Now, I sat with the Japanese delegation at those talks because I was part of the university that was advising the ministry at that time. And I was watching the Australians as they came into the room. They walked into the room and the Japanese were there, very formal, bowing as they do. It's their cultural thing. And these Australians wandered in and slapping their Japanese, "G'day, mate," and you could see the Japanese cringing, And what do I call you? What's your name? That sort of approach. Now, that in those contexts, Japanese are extremely formal and need to be in terms of their cultural configuration. And then we all sat down, and the Japanese said, well, the Japanese chairman said in English to the Australians, "We are in Tokyo. We assume that we can conduct these negotiations in Japanese. Who is your interpreter?" And the Australians sort of looked around. "Oh, we thought we'd do it in English." So the chairman on my side of the room said to Mr. Seiko, "You go and sit with the Australians. You speak good English and you can be their interpreter. So he did, and he did it very well. But at coffee and lunch breaks, he would come and talk to us, telling us exactly what the Australians were, their strategies and so on. It was a clear example of stupidity on the Australians' part. And we can't afford that any longer. We've got to have business people and media people and so on who can converse and dialogue and understand and who are au fait with the cultures. So we need an educating process. And finally, we really do need to develop foreign policy engagement in what foreign policy scholars call niche diplomacy. Niche diplomacy is things like human rights, climate change advocacy, asylum seekers and refugees, nuclear non-proliferation. These important global issues at the present time, Australia should be at the forefront of these events. One of my close colleagues at the University of Melbourne, Professor Richard Tanter, is chairman of ICAN, the Australian campaign against nuclear arms. And they of course, won the Nobel Prize, Peace Prize recently. And it's very interesting that Australia, though we've got this Australian organisation heading this international group that have won this very prestigious prize, Australia refused to vote in the United Nations in favour of continuing the Nuclear Non-Proliferation Treaty, for example. So I'm trying to suggest that we really do need to get over our dependent middle power infatuation with the United States. I think Donald Trump will help us do that in a kind of negative way, but we really do. And it's time, surely, as Malcolm Fraser put it, that we become our own people, that we become capable of being Australians who can be proud of who we are for a whole range of governance integrity issues.